Imagine you have two fathers, each giving you completely opposite advice about money. One father says, go to school, get a secure job, play it safe. The other urges, build businesses and invest, make money work for you. This is the true story of Robert Kiyosaki, a boy raised with two father figures, his educated but financially struggling biological father, the poor dad, and his best friend's wealthy father, the rich dad. The clash of their philosophies became a life-changing financial education. By the end of this
Caught
journey, you'll
between
not only
two
know what Robert's rich
mindsets.
dad taught him, you'll feel as if you were there, learning those lessons, questioning old beliefs, and awakening to a new mindset about money. Two dads, two mindsets. Robert's story begins in Hawaii in the 1950s with a 9-year-old boy caught between the mindsets of two very different dads. His poor dad, Robert's real father, was a highly educated man, a superintendent of education, who believed in the traditional American path to success: study hard, get good grades, then find a stable job with good benefits. Security and frugality were his mantras. He often preached about the importance of job security, living within your means, and climbing the ladder one step at a time. Like many well-intentioned parents, he thought that a high income and a college degree were the keys to prosperity. In stark contrast, Robert's rich dad, his best friend Mike's father, had a grade school education but a PhD in street smarts. This man built a business empire in Honolulu through entrepreneurship and savvy investments. Rich Dad didn't look rich. At first glance, he was just a man running a few local stores, but he thought differently. He believed financial knowledge and bold thinking were the real keys to wealth. He taught Robert that school smarts aren't money smarts. Schools train people to become employees, but schools don't teach how money really works. While poor dad would say, money matters should be left to the adults, rich dad would smile and say, you're never too young to learn about money. The stage was set. Two fathers, two philosophies. Young Robert was eager to learn, but first he had to unlearn everything we think we know about money. The tension came to a head one bright Hawaiian Saturday. Rich Dad had agreed to teach Robert and Mike about making money, but his lessons were anything but typical. He had the boys work in his little convenience store for 10 cents an hour. Weeks went by with the boys dusting shelves, feeling frustrated and underpaid. Finally, fed up with earning peanuts, Robert confronted Rich Dad. He wanted to quit. And this is where the real teaching began. The rich don't work for money. A lesson in the store. In a dimly lit office, Rich Dad listened quietly as 9-year-old Robert, voice trembling with anger, complained that he wasn't learning anything. He was just being exploited for 10 cents an hour. Rich Dad calmly chuckled and said, in less than a month, you sound like most of my employees. Robert was taken aback. Rich Dad explained that life was pushing him around to teach him a lesson. Most people, Rich Dad said, get up every day to work for money out of fear. Fear of bills, fear of being fired, fear of not having enough. They get angry at their boss or their paycheck but never learn what's really going on. Robert realized he had felt the same fear and anger in his few weeks of work, a miniature version of the adult rat race. Then Rich Dad smiled and shared the lesson that changed everything. The poor and middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them. In that moment, Robert grasped the difference between his two dads. Poor Dad believed you should work for a salary and avoid risks. Rich Dad believed you should build assets that earn money for you even when you're not working. One was running in the rat race, the other was quietly building a money machine. To drive the point home, Rich Dad actually offered Robert to pay him nothing for his work, and later even dangled a much higher pay to test him. Robert was stunned. Rich Dad's message was clear: don't be controlled by a paycheck. If Robert's only goal was a higher wage, he'd fall into the same trap most people do, working harder and harder for a slightly bigger check without ever escaping the cycle. Instead, Rich Dad wanted Robert to use his head to find opportunities. He said, use this, tapping Robert's forehead, and you'll thank me later. That afternoon, Robert and Mike noticed the store had piles of old comic books that were going to waste. Sensing an opportunity, they asked for the comics instead of a raise. With Rich Dad's subtle guidance, the boys started their own comic book library for kids in the neighborhood, charging 10 cents admission to read all they wanted. Suddenly, their money was working for them. They earned at one point around $9.50 a week without having to be there, far more than the $1.20 they'd earned slaving in the store for those same hours. It was a small venture, but a giant leap in mindset. Robert had learned his first Rich Dad lesson. Don't just work for money. Figure out how to make money work for you. Escaping the rat race. Assets versus liabilities. Through more lessons and stories, Rich Dad revealed the secret of how the wealthy escape the rat race. He drew diagrams on paper, showing Robert the difference between assets and liabilities. You see, he told the boys, an asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. This simple definition hit home. It wasn't about the dictionary definition of a house or a car. It was about cash flow. Poor Dad, like so many people, believed that a house is an asset. Rich Dad disagreed. If your home is only generating expenses, mortgage, maintenance, taxes, then it's actually a liability in your life. For example, Poor Dad would proudly say, "Our home is our biggest investment." Rich Dad would counter, "Your home is a personal expense. Unless it generates income, it's not an asset." This was a shock to Robert, and it challenges what many of us are taught. After all, isn't buying a home the American dream? But Rich Dad wasn't against home ownership. He simply taught Robert to first buy assets that will pay for those luxuries. Don't dip into your salary to buy a new car or a vacation, he'd say. Acquire an asset that earns money and let the asset buy the car or vacation for you. In other words, build the engine first, then enjoy the ride. Robert saw this firsthand. His poor dad, despite a good salary, always struggled with bills. Every pay raise led to a new expense, a better car, a bigger house. Some money kept flowing out. This is what Kiyosaki calls the rat race, an endless cycle of earn, spend, stay broke. It's the common path where no matter how hard you work, you never seem to get ahead because liabilities and expenses keep eating your income. Rich Dad showed that the rich escape this trap by investing in assets that generate passive income, income that comes in even when you're not actively working. They keep expenses low, reinvest extra cash into income-producing things like rental properties, stocks, bonds, notes, or businesses, until one day their asset income exceeds their expenses. At that point, they're out of the rat race. They're financially free. Think about that. What would life be like if your monthly income came not from your 9-to-5 job, but from your investments and businesses? Your rental property pays your mortgage, your stocks cover your groceries, your side business pays your utilities. According to Rich Dad, this is how the wealthy live. Their assets work overtime so they don't have to. Financial freedom isn't about having millions in the bank necessarily. It's when your passive income alone covers your expenses, so working becomes a choice, not a necessity. Rich Dad often repeated to the boys, if you want to be rich, buy assets. If you want to be poor or middle class, buy liabilities. It was a blunt mantra that flew in the face of conventional advice. Poor Dad had spent a lifetime buying liabilities he thought were assets, a house with a hefty mortgage, the family car, maybe a new TV, and had little to show for it but more months of hard work. Rich Dad, conversely, would acquire an asset, say a piece of real estate, and let it generate cash to pay for luxuries later on. The rich buy luxuries last, while the poor and middle class tend to buy luxuries first. This delayed gratification and focus on passive income is what set Rich Dad apart. If you're feeling a mindset shift already, you're not alone. These ideas can be jarring. We're often conditioned to think like Poor Dad, work for your paycheck, play it safe, debt is bad, my house is my biggest asset. Rich Dad turned those ideas upside down. For many Americans, adopting the Rich Dad mindset means unlearning habits passed down for generations, but Robert's story shows it's possible, with the right knowledge, to escape the vicious cycle that keeps so many people anxious about money. Mind your own business, entrepreneurship versus employment. Another key lesson Rich Dad imparted was mind your own business. By this, he didn't mean start a company at age 9, though Robert eventually did become an entrepreneur. He meant focus on building your asset column, not someone else's. Poor Dad, true to his generation, believed in working for a good company and steadily climbing the corporate ladder. He would say, find a big firm that offers job security and retire with a pension. In his world, loyalty to one employer was the safest path. Rich Dad had a very different view. You should become the kind of person who owns the ladder. Instead of toiling your whole life to enrich your employer or shareholders, spend your time acquiring your own assets and income streams. This could mean starting a side business, investing in rental properties, or even creating intellectual property. The point is to think like an owner, not just an employee. For example, when Robert was a teenager, Poor Dad wanted him to build a strong resume to get into a good university and then a solid job. Rich Dad, meanwhile, encouraged Robert to build a business even if it failed, or to take a summer job that taught a new skill rather than a simply paid more. Work to learn, not for money, Rich Dad often said. He believed that skills and experience were more valuable in the long run than a few extra dollars in starting salary. In one chapter, Kiyosaki recounts how he took a job after college that paid very little but taught him how to sell because he knew that sales skills would help him in entrepreneurship later on, a decision his poor dad couldn't understand at the time. This illustrates a big mindset difference. Poor Dad saw a job as an end. Rich Dad saw a job as a means, a chance to learn something that could be applied to one's own investments or business. Rich Dad also shed light on how the rich legally pay less in taxes, not by cheating, but by understanding the rules. He taught Robert about the power of corporations and tax law. A corporation can pay expenses pre-tax and shelter income, whereas employees pay taxes first on their earnings. Poor Dad, a government employee, resented taxes but felt powerless against them. Rich Dad used knowledge and good accountants to make taxes work in his favor. This was yet another way Rich Dad minded his own business and kept more of his money working for him. The lesson for us is not necessarily to run out and start a corporation, but to educate ourselves on financial rules. As Kiyosaki puts it, financial literacy, understanding taxes, debt, inflation, and so on, is part of taking control of your financial destiny. The psychology of wealth, shifting your mindset. Beyond the practical lessons of money, Rich Dad, Poor Dad dives deep into the psychology of wealth. A critical theme is how our thoughts and words shape our financial life. Poor Dad often said things like, "We can't afford that," or "Money doesn't grow on trees." Those phrases, while common in many households, come from a mindset of scarcity and fear. Rich Dad forbade Robert from saying, "I can't afford it." Instead, he taught him to ask, "How can I afford it?" A simple change that forces the mind to find solutions rather than wallow in limitation. This was a profound insight. The way we speak about money reflects our beliefs about money. Saying, "I can't afford it," shuts down possibility. Asking, "How can I afford it?" opens your mind to new ideas, maybe a side hustle, cutting expenses, or an investment opportunity. It's about cultivating a mindset of possibility and action instead of resignation. Fear and desire are two emotions Kiyosaki highlights. Fear of not having money, of losing a job, drives people to work hard, but also cling to what's safe. Desire for nice things, for a higher standard of living, drives people to spend what they earn. Together, these emotions can trap us in a never-ending work-spend cycle. Rich Dad warned that if we don't learn to master our emotions, especially the fear of being without money, we will forever be slaves to money. Most people, he said, are so afraid of losing money that they never invest and thus never grow. They play it safe, perhaps stashing savings in a bank, but then inflation eats away at their wealth, or they miss out on big opportunities because they're afraid to take calculated risks. Rich Dad argued that the lack of financial education coupled with fear is why the majority struggle financially. Overcoming that fear by increasing your financial IQ and seeing failure as a learning opportunity is essential to changing your financial life. Rich Dad also emphasized the power of self-discipline. Pay yourself first, even before you pay your bills. This meant investing or saving a portion of your income for you, your assets, before paying expenses. Poor Dad, who diligently paid all his bills first, often found little left over for investing. Rich Dad's approach was the opposite. He would rather face the pressure of paying bills after setting aside investment money, which motivated him to find creative ways to earn more. It's a daring strategy, but he wanted Robert to understand that building wealth requires treating your future self as the most important creditor. By consistently investing in assets, paying yourself, you break the habit of living paycheck to paycheck. One cannot overlook the entrepreneurial spirit Rich Dad nurtured. He taught Robert to see opportunities where others see obstacles. For instance, where Poor Dad saw a rundown house as something to avoid, Rich Dad saw a chance to buy low, fix and flip, or rent high. The rich invent money, he would say, meaning that with creativity and financial know-how, you can create value and wealth from seemingly nothing. This mindset of innovation over mere labor is what separates those who just work hard from those who work smart. It doesn't mean the rich don't work. It means they put effort into building pipelines of income rather than carrying buckets one at a time. The suspense and excitement in Kiyosaki's narrative often comes from these moments of revelation when young Robert starts to see the world through his rich dad's eyes. Assets everywhere, opportunities everywhere, if you train your mind to find them. And speaking of the mind, Rich Dad's final lesson was often about continuous learning. The moment you think you know it all, you've sealed your fate financially, he'd caution. In the book's later chapters, Kiyosaki stresses that even decades later, he was still learning, still reading, still attending classes and seminars to improve his financial education. Rich Dad instilled in him a love for learning. Rich people have libraries, the poor have big TVs, as one famous line goes. The takeaway? Financial success is a lifelong journey, one where you must keep feeding your mind with new information and ideas. The world of money is always changing, new laws, new markets, new technologies, so the truly wealthy stay adaptable and curious. This humility to learn and adapt is part of the rich mindset. Conclusion: changing your financial destiny. As our narrative comes full circle, picture Robert Kiyosaki years later as a successful investor, looking back on the boy who had two dads. One father gave him love, education, and the old rules of money. The other gave him a new set of rules, ones that few people learn yet make all the difference. By embracing Rich Dad's lessons, Robert was able to retire in his 40s and pursue his passions, while his poor dad sadly struggled into old age despite his PhD and respectable career. It's a dramatic illustration of a simple truth. It's not about how much money you make, it's about how you think about money and how much you keep. The story of Rich Dad, Poor Dad is psychologically engaging because it's our story too. Many of us have a poor dad in our life, a parent, a teacher, or simply the voice of conventional wisdom telling us to avoid risks, stick to the system, and not talk about money. This book serves as the rich dad we may not have had, whispering uncomfortable truths and bold ideas in our ear. Don't work for money, make it work for you. Don't blindly climb the corporate ladder, own the ladder. Don't let fear dictate your choices, let knowledge empower you. It does so through compelling parables and real conversations, so we learn alongside Robert, feeling his confusion, his excitement, and finally his confidence as the light bulb goes off. Ultimately, Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a call to action to build your financial intelligence and take control of your financial destiny. It's about having the courage to question old beliefs like, is your house really an asset? And the discipline to forge a new path. Can I acquire assets to cover my expenses? Whether it's starting that side business you've been dreaming about, investing in that rental property, or simply reading more and training your mind, the lessons challenge and inspire you to act. More than 25 years after its first publication, the principles in Rich Dad, Poor Dad have stood the test of time through booms, busts, and technological upheavals. The reason? They're rooted in timeless wisdom about human behavior and money. As you close this chapter, ask yourself, which dad's advice am I following in my life? If you find you've been stuck in the rat race, know that you have the power to change your financial story. In the end, Robert Kiyosaki's two dads gave him the gift of contrast, and in that contrast lies a message of hope for all of us. No matter where you're starting from, you can choose the mindset of the rich dad and start seeing money as a tool you control, not a hurdle you endure.